The biggest mistake most people make before starting a woodworking project is thinking the project starts when you pick up the tools. It doesn't. It starts long before that. And if you miss what happens in this phase, everything that follows becomes harder, slower, and more expensive than it needs to be. Most people begin with a clear vision. A table, a bench, a cabinet. They can already see it finished, sitting exactly where it belongs. But when they sit down to actually start, something subtle happens. They grab a plan that looks right. Nice images, clean layout, maybe even labeled parts. And that's where things quietly begin to fall apart. Because what looks complete on the surface often isn't complete underneath. So they move forward anyway. They buy the wood. They clear their schedule. They start cutting. And for a while, everything feels fine. Until it doesn't. A measurement feels slightly off. A step skips ahead without explanation. Two pieces that should align don't. Now they slow down. They double check. They try to figure it out. They adjust. They improvise. And suddenly, something that should have been straightforward turns into a series of small compounding decisions. Each one introduces a little more uncertainty, a little more doubt, and a little more risk. By the time they realize what's happening, they're already deep into the project, with material cut, time invested, and no clean way to go back. So what went wrong? It's easy to assume it was a lack of skill, or experience, or tools. But if you look closely, those aren't usually the real problem. The real issue isn't how you build, it's what you're building from. Because in woodworking, the outcome is already determined before the first cut is made. And that outcome is shaped by one thing, the structure behind the plan you're following. Most people evaluate a project based on how it looks at the end, but very few evaluate the path required to get there. And that path is where everything lives. If the sequence isn't clear, you'll hesitate. If the measurements aren't exact, you'll compensate. If the material list isn't precise, you'll guess. And every time you guess, you introduce error. It's like assembling a puzzle where a few pieces are slightly the wrong shape. You can force them into place, but the whole image starts to distort. At first, it's barely noticeable. But as you move forward, the distortion compounds. Until eventually, something doesn't fit at all. And now you're not building anymore, you're troubleshooting. This is why so many projects get abandoned halfway, not because people lose interest, but because the process stops making sense. And when the process breaks, momentum disappears with it. So before starting any woodworking project, the question isn't, do I have the tools? Or even, do I have the time? The real question is the path from start to finish actually clear? Because clarity at the beginning removes friction later. And friction is what kills most projects. A solid plan doesn't just show you what the final piece looks like. It guides you through the invisible decisions, the order of assembly, the exact cuts, the transitions between steps, the small details that don't seem important until they are. Without that structure, you're not following a process, you're interpreting one. And interpretation is where inconsistency lies. This is also why two people can attempt the same project and get completely different results. One follows a clear, complete path. The other fills in gaps along the way. Same materials, same tools, different outcomes. Not because one is more talented, but because one had less ambiguity to deal with. When you remove ambiguity, something interesting happens. You move faster. You make fewer mistakes. And more importantly, you stay confident throughout the build because you're not constantly asking, is this right? You know it is. That's the shift most people never experience. They think woodworking is about precision in execution. But in reality, it's about precision in preparation. Execution simply reflects what was already decided. So before you start your next project, step back for a moment. Look at the plan. Not just for what it promises at the end, but for how it gets you there. Ask yourself, does it show every step clearly? Are the measurements specific and consistent? Is the material list complete enough to avoid guesswork? Does the sequence actually make sense from a build perspective? If the answer to any of those is unclear, that uncertainty doesn't stay on paper. It follows you into the workshop. And once you're there, it becomes much harder to fix. A well-structured plan doesn't make the work easier. It makes the work possible, without unnecessary friction. And that distinction changes everything. If you want a deeper breakdown of what a complete woodworking plan actually looks like, and how to recognize one before you waste time or materials, you'll find a structured guide linked in the description. You can also subscribe if you want more content that breaks down the process behind building things that actually turn out the way you imagined. And once you start seeing projects this way, you won't approach them the same again.